We are in a pause in the political game of musical chairs at the top echelons of the Trump administration. But the president is doing nothing to quell speculation that a few more chairs may be pulled before long. This comes as President Trump ponders whether his feud with one cable news outlet will be successful and changes his mind about new prison reform legislation. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has all of that tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Yeah, what we call it around here, Brett, is Wednesday. Every day a lot happens. Prison reform has long attracted bipartisan support, but President Trump took it a step further today, backing not just prison reform, but the sentencing that puts people behind bars in the first place. After months of balking, President Trump today threw his support behind a compromise bill to reform how criminals are penalized.
The bill includes reasonable sentencing reforms while keeping dangerous and violent criminals off our streets.
Among other things, the First Step Act would shorten mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, change the 3 strikes you're out penalty from life in prison to 25 years, eliminate the stacking regulation that makes it a federal crime to possess a firearm while committing another crime, and end the disparity between crack and powdered cocaine possession. President Trump was wary of supporting the measure, fearing it would make him appear soft on crime. His former Attorney General wanted no part of it.
There's still those who would like you to believe we should release criminals early, shorten sentences for serious traffickers, drug traffickers. That would be, in my opinion, bad for the rule of law. It would be bad for public safety.
But after several law enforcement groups backed the new measure, the president felt it safe to jump on board.
In many respects, we're getting very much tougher on the truly bad criminals, of which, unfortunately, there are many. But we're treating people differently for different crimes.
One of the big questions looming over the White House today, which staff members will be thrown overboard? In an interview with the Daily Caller today, President Trump said he will make a decision soon on the future of his DHS secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen. He also did not dismiss new rumors that Chief of Staff John Kelly may also be on the way out, though the president did say no decisions have been made. And the White House today responded to a lawsuit filed by CNN yesterday seeking to reinstate the press pass of correspondent Jim Acosta. In a court filing, the White House insisting it can pick and choose who covers the president. Quote, the president and White House possess the same broad discretion to regulate access to the White House for journalists and other members of the public that they possess to select which journalists receive interviews or which journalists they acknowledge at press conferences. In a friend of the court brief to be filed soon, Fox News joined the CNN case. News President Jay Wallace saying, while we don't condone the growing antagonistic tone by both the president and the press at recent media avails, we do support a free press, access, and open exchanges for the American people. In that interview with the Daily Caller today, President Trump said he didn't know whether the White House would prevail in that lawsuit, but thought that it would, saying, quote, is it freedom of the press when somebody comes in and starts screaming questions and won't sit down? Brett?
John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. This is a Fox News alert. The lawyer for the adult film actress who says she had a sexual relationship with then businessman Donald Trump has been arrested on a domestic violence charge. That is according to the Associated Press. In just the past few minutes, Michael Avenatti was arrested today after his estranged wife filed a felony domestic violence report. TMZ is reporting that her face was swollen and bruised. The AP citing a law enforcement official with the LAPD saying that Avenatti is in police custody at this hour following domestic violence allegation. We'll continue to follow that story. The Justice Department says President Trump did not break the law when he bypassed the Deputy Attorney General and appointed someone else to the top job following the firing of Jeff Sessions, despite several other legal experts disagreeing when it comes to the appointment of Matt Whitaker. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge looks at the evidence tonight and how it's being received.
The 20-page Justice Department legal opinion backs President Trump's appointment of Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker. Relying on the Federal Vacancies Reform Act and past precedent, the Office of Legal Counsel found Senate confirmation is not required if the appointment is temporary. The constitutionality of Mr. Whitaker's designation is supported by Supreme Court precedent, by acts of Congress, and by countless examples of executive practice. Under the Justice Department's succession statute, the acting attorney general's job falls to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who until recently oversaw the special counsel Robert Mueller probe. The Office of Legal Counsel found the president may use the Vacancies Reform Act as an alternative, which was recognized and used by Presidents Bush and Obama. On Capitol Hill, attention turned to the impact on special counsel Mueller.
We want to make sure that the acting attorney general does not interfere with the Mueller investigation, and we believe our Republican colleagues will join us.
We know how the president feels about the Mueller investigation, but he's never said he wants to shut it down. I've never heard anybody down there say they want to shut it down.
Before the midterms, Rosenstein was under scrutiny over allegations he discussed secretly recording the president in May 2017 and removing him from office. A Republican House chairman says they still want Rosenstein under oath for a transcribed interview before the Democrats take over.
We're working very hard right now as we speak to get that done.
So you're working with the Justice Department?
We're working with a number of people.
On protecting the Mueller investigation, outgoing Republican Senator Jeff Flake says he will oppose the president's judicial nominees until legislation is brought to the full Senate for a vote. The senator's threat complicates Republican efforts to move the president.
From Capitol Hill.
The newly elected House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy issued a strong warning to the upcoming Democratic majority.
If their agenda is simply investigations, impeachment, and not focused on the hardworking American public, we'll be there to defend the American public.
McCarthy easily defeated Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan 159-43. Steve Scalise will continue as whip after being unanimously reelected. And Wyoming's Liz Cheney will be third as conference chair, a job her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, once held.
My father has a real love of this institution, a love of the House of Representatives, and it's a love that I share.
Newly elected members posed for a class photo in front of the Capitol while going through orientation and trying to learn the routine in Congress. This is Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi is trying to round up enough support to be Speaker.
Let us just find our common ground as to how we go forward. First, let us recognize that we achieved a great victory.
Pelosi has some time since House Democrats won't make their selection until 2 weeks from today, ahead of a floor vote in January. But some Democrats say Pelosi has a serious numbers problem since many of the newly elected campaigned for change against her, and some senior lawmakers agree.
I'm not making a case to anyone. I'm voting what I think is right. I believe we need change, and so I'm supporting change.
In the Senate, Mitch McConnell will continue to be the majority leader. South Dakota's John Thune moves up to the second slot as Republican whip, and Iowa's Joni Ernst will serve as vice chair of the GOP conference. McConnell says Democrats and Republicans can get things done.
We'll be looking for ways, now that we have divided government again, to make some progress for the country.
Senate Democrats will be led by Chuck Schumer again, who sounds like he may have a different vision.
Where do Senate Democrats go from here? We're going to be relentlessly focused on the issues that matter to the people.
In terms of the Speaker's race, Pelosi so far is the only declared candidate. If it turns out she does not have the votes, her critics are hoping she'll step aside. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. One of the big winners in last week's midterm elections, Montana Democrat Senator Jon Tester. He was successful despite heavy opposition and campaigning from President Trump. Tonight, correspondent Jillian Turner looks at what Tester did that many fellow Democrats could not.
You must defeat the Democrats, and you must defeat Senator Jon Tester.
President Trump pulled out all the stops this election cycle to beat back incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Tester in Montana. The president, vice president, and Donald Trump Jr. all visiting the state during the run-up to the midterms. But despite the president and GOP's best efforts, Tester prevailed against Republican Matt Rosendale and will soon begin his third term in the U.S. Senate.
I think that actually their visits in the end helped me. They saw how political the president was making this race.
Tester's victory was far from a sure thing in Montana, a red state President Trump won by 20 points in 2016. He voted against the president's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, a move that contributed to defeat for some fellow Democrats up for re-election. Now, political strategists are scratching their heads, pondering whether Tester's an outlier or the crest of a new blue wave in the western U.S. Democrats give Tester all the credit.
The base is more about kind of having a personal relationship with voters, where they know you, they like you as a person.
But unlike other Democrats with similar voting records who lost, like Heitkamp and McCaskill, Tester tapped into something else.
He also had this kind of cross-cutting brand as a reformer and kind of a populist for the little guy against the big guy.
GOP strategists say this victory was only possible in Montana.
It's different from its neighbors like Idaho and Wyoming in that it has this deep vein of Democratic unionism in the mining parts of the state. And he was able to bring those voters back in his column, even though they voted for Trump just 2 years earlier.
While politicos tussle over the Tester anomaly, he himself maintains a simple approach.
It's just a matter of telling the truth.
Both sides agree Tester has proven a unique ability to straddle the political aisle. He's keyed into the grassroots concerns of rural Montanans across the state, but at the same time, his Washington track record brings him firmly in line with the Democrats here on Capitol Hill. Brett?
Jillian, thank you. The president gets back up on his call for acting attorney general, plus prison reform gets the front burner treatment. We'll get reaction from the panel when we come back.
I want to make sure that the acting attorney general does not interfere with the Mueller investigation, and we believe our Republican colleagues will join us.
No indication that the Mueller investigation will not be allowed to finish, and it should be allowed to finish. We know how the president feels about the Mueller investigation, but he's never said he wants to shut it down. I've never heard anybody down there say they want to shut it down. I think it's in no danger, and so I don't think any legislation is necessary.
A lot of talk on Capitol Hill today about Matt Whitaker, the acting attorney general. The DOJ putting out legal counsel opinion on the appointment, saying that they advised the president's designation of Mr. Whitaker on a temporary basis, did not transform his position into a principal office requiring Senate confirmation, and they advised that he could go forward with that and be lawful. Others say that's not true. For example, John Yoo, a well-respected lawyer from the Bush administration, said Whitaker's appointment violates the Appointments Clause, clear text, because he serves as Attorney General, even if in an acting capacity, but never underwent Senate advice and consent. He goes on to question, if they challenge this, whether any action as acting Attorney General will then come into question. Let's bring in our panel. Start there. A lot to talk about tonight. Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics co-founder and president. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. And Charles Lane, opinion writer for The Washington Post. Chuck, the DOJ seems confident in their precedent and their advice, but there's a lot of talk about whether that's accurate.
I've done my best as a layman to sort through these various arguments, and I guess the way it looks to me is there was kind of a choice of legal authority here the president had. He could have gone by one statute and one norm that says you go with the deputy in this situation. Another statute that the OLC and this Office of Legal Counsel is relying on heavily says, no, you don't necessarily have to. You've got this temporary option of 7 months. So people can argue about that endlessly, but I think what seems pretty clear about the politics of it is that Matt Whitaker is a more sympathetic person to Donald Trump's position. Rod Rosenstein is somebody he's had a lot of quarrels with. That would have been the alternative position. So that tipped the balance, and that's why he chose Matt Whitaker. He is taking a risk that anything Whitaker does, quite apart from firing Mueller or anything like that, anything that Matt Whitaker does is or could be challenged in court later on, including things that President Trump is not going to want to have struck down in court.
And for example, the investigation into what the FBI did in the early part of the Trump campaign.
Yeah, there is a long precedent of putting people in positions like this so long as they are temporary. Going all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, presidents have done this, and generally speaking, all three branches of government have recognized this ability to do this so long as it's temporary. If it weren't temporary, then you really would have some problems. But if you want to talk about people who aren't Senate confirmed, Bob Mueller is a great example of someone who who never went through Senate confirmation process and has a limitless, financially limitless and otherwise limitless probe counterintelligence investigation that's going on. People seem to think that Rod Rosenstein would be better to have in charge of that instead of Matt Whitaker. Well, Rod Rosenstein has a plethora of conflicts of interest, from being involved in these investigations, from having signed one of the warrants to spy on a member of the Trump campaign, to obstructing justice as Congress tried to investigate what was going on, to writing that memo about Comey getting fired that President Trump used. So if you're actually worried about conflicts of interest, Rod Rosenstein wouldn't be a good choice either.
Obviously, the biggest thing here is about what happens with the Mueller investigation. You heard Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell saying there's no indication that it's going to be shut down from the president and the administration. But there are Senate members like Jeff Flake and others who say we are not going forward with a lot of things unless you protect Mueller. Take a listen.
Senator Coons and I are prepared to make it again and again until there is a vote on this vital bipartisan legislation on the Senate floor. And I have informed the Majority Leader that I will not vote to advance any of the 21 judicial nominees pending in the Judiciary Committee or vote to confirm the 32 judges awaiting confirmation on the Senate floor until S-2644 is brought to the full Senate for a vote.
And Tom, that is the bill protecting Mueller. Now remember, in this lame duck session, it's 51-49, giving Flake and others a lot more power.
Well, right. That's valid for about another 6 weeks. Okay. And then Jeff Flake is gone, and the Republican Senate caucus is going to be a little bit more conservative and a little bit more expanded. And I think that's an important feature, because if Trump is going to have to at some point nominate new cabinet members, perhaps put Whitaker up for confirmation in the Senate, but also if he goes through a cabinet reshuffle, he will have other cabinet officials that will need confirmation. And the fact that Republicans will have 2 more votes in the Senate gives them a little bit of running room for his nominations.
We are years into a widespread investigation into this collusion theory, this theory that Donald Trump colluded with Russia as a traitor to steal the 2016 election, and we have no evidence supporting that. At the same time, we have all sorts of evidence of wrongdoing at the FBI, that they surveilled their political opponents, that they were leaking against their political opponents, that they have obstructed justice, and we have no special counsel looking into those things. It is astounding that Jeff Flake would be concerned at this late date, having so little, that there wouldn't be more a desire to look into what's
Sure, but you're not advocating shutting Mueller down before it's done, right?
I don't actually even know what the scope of the Mueller probe is. I think that's something Americans have a right to know. What is the scope? What are the limits? Is this something that can be used to just go after political enemies, or is it actually looking into what we were promised, which is treasonous collusion with Russia to steal the 2016 election?
We shall see. Who knows? In a matter of weeks, maybe. Here is the president today on criminal justice reform.
Working together with my administration over the last 2 years, these members have reached a bipartisan agreement. Did I hear the word bipartisan? The bill includes reasonable sentencing reforms while keeping dangerous and violent criminals off our streets. I urge lawmakers in both House and Senate to work hard and to act quickly and send a final bill to my desk, and I look very much forward to signing it.
Chuck, this is a big deal for supporters of this legislation, bipartisan legislation. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, really pushing this effort up on Capitol Hill, not just prison reform, but also sentencing reform when it comes to drug offenders and others.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the opioid legislation that they also passed before the election on a bipartisan basis, in that, yes, it's great to see the 2 parties can work together on something, but this was the lowest common denominator in terms of sentencing reform.
And we should point out it's not through yet. They still have to get the votes.
They still have to get the votes. The critics of criminal justice, federal sentencing and so on, wanted a lot more in terms of, reducing mandatory minimums and so forth and so on. This was about the least that they would settle for. Jeff Sessions, incidentally, was not enthusiastic about some of the provisions, although he supported some of the others. So, yeah, I think actually, on balance, you'd have to say it's likely to go through. And I think also the president wanted to strike a different note today. He's been reported to be kind of angry and ornery and saying, kind of untoward things to Theresa May on the phone. And he got to show a gentler, more results-oriented face at this press.
And with the Democratic House coming in, signaling that you're ready to sign bipartisan legislation is probably, at least an interesting hat tip.
I watched this today and wondered why they didn't do this before the election. I mean, this was Trump at his best, actually, standing there, talking about we're still going to be tough on crime. We support law enforcement. This legislation is supported by law enforcement, and it's also bipartisan. This might have been an asset to him, 10 days ago, and Republicans 10 days ago, especially for folks in the suburbs.
Yeah, suburban voters. That's right. Panel, thanks. Next up, the return of Congress, next year's leadership decisions, and the breaking news, too.
1,000,000%. I'm a yes vote all the way through the end, but everybody's going to make their individual decisions.
It's clear I'm not going to be voting for the current leader. I believe we need change, and so I'm supporting change.
We're going to bring change. The people want change, you know, and this is the establishment versus change.
What's your level of confidence?
High.
Well, really, that's the drama on Capitol Hill, whether Nancy Pelosi will have the votes. Most expect that she will to become House Speaker. Today, the voting on the minority side, the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, 159 to Jim Jordan's 43 votes. The only addition, really, that was notable was Liz Cheney, daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, elected chairwoman of the House GOP conference. Back with the panel. Chuck, you look at, you know, the Democrats trying to get their head around leadership and what happens.
You know, this is such an interesting dilemma because it's a question of, for the Democrats, you want to reward past service or you want to set a new tone for the future. And they can't deny that Nancy Pelosi did a lot to help them win the majority back this time through fundraising and, very importantly, through engineering a message that would work for all of them. On the other hand, it is a fact that of the 54 new Democratic members, 8 said they would vote against, as a campaign promise, said they would vote against Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, and by my count, 39 dodged or wouldn't declare on that issue. And so it's obvious that because of her low popularity ranking, she's also a weight on the party and its image for the future. There's a lot of new people coming into Congress now who've never been there before, don't really know how the game is played, so they might be tempted to say, okay, let's throw her out. But at the same time, maybe they need her to show them the ropes.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez take part in a protest, a sit-in in Pelosi's office, which is, as I said yesterday, not exactly the place you get the prime committee assignments when you're protesting in the leader's office.
Right, but that's why she's been effective as a new congresswoman, is that she is willing to thwart some of the norms that are there. I think people on both left and right think that it would be good to get Nancy out of her leadership position, and I think they both might be wrong. She is a very effective person at what she does. She's very good at not just the fundraising, but strategically thinking through how to get legislation passed.
She can crack the whip, get the votes.
And just even being good at fundraising is such a key thing. I'm not sure if Republicans want to replace her with someone who's much younger, much more ideologically persuasive. So I think people, there might be lessons for both sides.
Well, in fact, President Trump tweeted that, saying if she doesn't have the votes, Republicans should vote for her too.
I mean, Republicans would love to see her in the speakership. I mean, the problem is, you know, and look, these freshmen are going to walk the plank. They're going to have to go and take the vote because there's no real alternative. That's the thing. You can't beat, you know, something with nothing. And right now, there's nothing opposing Nancy Pelosi. But look, on the Republican side, you've got Liz Cheney, but you also got Joni Ernst in the Senate ascending to leadership. And the thing about Republicans is, when you're in the minority position, unity is key. Unity is key, and right now the question is, you know, how big of a problem is Jim Jordan and the Freedom Caucus going to be for Kevin McCarthy? Can they keep their caucus together in opposition? Because if they can't, you know, it could be a rough ride for them.
And really what the decision is for House Democrats, whether they go full-bore investigation or they try to get something done. Right. All right, let's turn to the breaking news. Michael Avenatti arrested in Los Angeles for domestic violence allegations, in custody of LAPD, a felony charge, we're told. Just getting details of this, thoughts around the table.
My thought is she hit me first is not a very fulsome defense. I don't think that's going to work very well for him, and I think his 2020 aspirations, I think, are pretty much over at this point.
Mon?
I'm always nervous about allegations that are made in the middle of divorce, and this is what is happening here. But I think this man has a track record of extremely questionable behavior. And what is surprising is how many people on the left are standing with him. He's the guy who ginned up the fake Julie Swetnick allegation against Brett Kavanaugh. And you had Planned Parenthood and National Abortion Rights Action League both saying they stand with her, even though those were fake allegations. So I think it's not just a problem of him, but who stands with him.
Quickly.
Michael Avenatti was never a likely winner of anything in 2020, and now he's even less likely and not a good face to put on the Democratic Party in 2020.
There were some people who were taking him seriously, though, which is amazing. When we come back, one animal will never forget this adventure.